Today, we document history. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. If you're a veteran viewer of this channel, you will remember this guitar. After 5 years, I was finally able to buy it. But before we get too deep in the history today, let's take a quick peek at it. Because if I've got these two beauties out today, you know what we're talking about is special. This is a Les Paul that was originally given to Les Paul because back in this era, he got one of everything, as well as many other special pieces. But inside here, my friends, sleeps the very first Super Custom. It's magnificent. It's strange. You probably think it looks a little bit bizarre. It's a blending of so many different models, and yet this is the only one exactly like it. Let's take a look at this. It has wooden binding. It's got a very nice flame top for being from 1979. It's 2 pieces within the 3-piece era. We've got nice gold hardware. That's not necessarily anything special. But then our edges are also heavily flamed. The back is also flamed maple. We've got a ridiculously flamed neck. We've got a brass nut, a brass truss rod cover that says Les Paul Limited Edition, but yet it's a normal custom. What is our story here? The Les Paul model was first introduced for the year 1952. That original body shape existed until, 1960-61, before swapping into what we now call the SG. They didn't bring it back until 1968. So within Les Paul lore, you can think of the original ones as 52 through about early 1969 before crazy changes start to happen to them. But in the current day guitar market, there are so many fancy limited editions, and that wasn't necessarily a thing until Norland took over and started changing stuff. A lot of traditionalists like to dog on the Norland era years, but that doesn't mean fancy guitars weren't made. So our first commemorative guitar was actually done for 1974. It was the 20th anniversary of the Les Paul. Granted, not all of them look exactly like this one. This was a particularly special example with the crazy flamed maple neck, but they had a fancy inlay that said 20th anniversary. That's about all they had going for it. But it was also around this time when the bicentennial model was being introduced, and or the true 20th anniversary, depending on what story you want to believe. This is called the Les Paul. They were produced from 1976 until very early 1980, and this is our main comparison piece today because it featured a Les Paul that was built like none other at this point in time, because it has the flame maple back, it has the flame sides, it's got the flame top, but yet at its core is still mahogany. So these are just like slightly thicker veneers put along the edge, kind of like how they do a 335 and then they do a flat back. But they featured all these fancy intricate wooden parts. I mean, it's not just the binding, it's the knobs, it's the pick guard, it's the pickup rings, the poker chip, the switch tip, our truss rod cover, and even our headstock's looking pretty wooden. And then from there you could cite the true 20th anniversary silver Les Paul custom that Guitar Center made. But in my opinion, it's the 50th anniversary Les Paul that was the first mass-produced good limited edition guitar. They made so many of these things. 3,411 is typically the accepted number, but that's just based on shipping ledgers. I've seen them higher than that. But these had so many fancy elements to them, such as our Super 400 inlays that do not go all the way up the neck. We have the introduction of a coil splitting switch, Series 7 humbuckers, again 2-piece top within the 3-piece era, and it's also when they started to do limited edition stamps. So this one is number 53 of that run from the initial year. And of course they had this cool little headstock, which kind of helped birth more limited editions. So that's all well and good. Why are you telling us this, Trogly? Well, to fully understand what makes this custom so special, you have to know about all those other models. So we've got the binding of a the Les Paul. We essentially just have the straight up body of a the Les Paul. It should still be a mahogany core, but we've got the rosewood everywhere, including our capped off area right here, and it's still the multi-layers of wood even in between that. It even features the harmonica bridge, but like a 2550, we have the Super 400 inlays that do not go all the way up the fretboard. So when you think Super Custom, you should be thinking primarily a the Les Paul that has a little bit of elements borrowed from a regular custom, and then they stole the fretboard off of a 2550. I view these as more so a runoff guitar from a the Les Paul. The last year of production for those, you start to see a lot of the wooden parts get replaced for brass and just regular plastic, and those things were ridiculously expensive. In the 1979 Gibson price list, they listed for a staggering $3,199. So as they stopped selling as many of those, apparently the story goes, a guy named Dick Schneider was getting ready to leave Gibson. And as like a parting present, he got to design his own model. That's one story I've heard circulating the internet. Other times I've just heard these are leftover the Les Paul bodies where they didn't have the rest of the parts to necessarily create a the Les Paul in its advertised format. So this births the model known as the Les Paul Limited Edition. It's a terrible name. You can't Google it because there's so many limited edition Les Pauls. That's why it's called a Super Custom. Now, I have documented a regular Super Custom before, and these actually have a very famous user. His name is Neil Schon of Journey. In fact, the Any Way You Want It music video prominently features him playing his Super Custom. And for years, people always wondered what that guitar was, and people would incorrectly assume, it's just a 2550 due to the fretboard. But no, that's not correct, because there's select angles where you can actually see it does have the figured back and the figured neck. This was a run of approximately 24 to 31 guitars. I've seen both numbers, and none of them have any evidence to back them up. You don't see them too often, so those things are pretty rare, but this was the first one built. So the story, as far as I understand it on this guitar, is it was gifted to Les Paul because he got one of everything and a whole bunch of other special models. Look at his estate auction, and you can see #1 prototype, pretty much anything you could ever want. But apparently, in the 90s, he sold this guitar to We Buy Guitars, which was a very famous shop at the time, and it was Richard Friedman who had purchased it from him. In fact, we actually have a photo of Friedman holding the guitar with Les Paul on the other side. Now, why he sold it, I just don't know. But We Buy Guitars is now Well-Strung Guitars, ran by the other partner, David Davidson. So I reached out to him to see if I could get even more info on this tale, but unfortunately, Richard retired in 2018, so as of right now, I don't have his side of the story. This was in the early 80s when Les Paul had sold it to Friedman, and then he had personally kept it in his collection for many years as never for sale, and the guy that I had purchased it from was pestering him all the time saying, hey, when you're ready to sell that, please give me the first chance. So he finally broke down and sold it to him because some changes were happening at the shop. And I told you, it took me 5 years to get this guitar. So when I documented the first Super Custom and started to make Would You Rock or Not style episodes on my channel, I've received a message from a gentleman in Israel claiming that he owns the first Super Custom made. It's the only one that has the wooden binding. And naturally, my interest is piqued. Like, I had to make another episode about this guitar right after just talking about Super Customs. It was so cool. But I had asked him, is it for sale? And he goes, no, it's not for sale. And I told him, you're a smart man. But he and I had kept in contact over the years because he knew I would be interested should it ever come up for sale. So he told me at that time I would consider trading it for a 68 Les Paul. And I gotta remember, the market was very different in 2018. So I always thought I'd keep my eye out for the right 68. I remember reaching out to Chicago Music Exchange going, you know what should one of these things sell for? Do you happen to have a lead on anyone who might have one? Because if I could make that happen, I would. But unfortunately, nothing really showed up for that first year, and he wasn't really that interested in letting it go anyway, because it had to be the right 68. So then another 1 or 2 years go by. We actually work out a cash deal, and I was all ready to buy it. It was about where I wanted to be, but unfortunately, PayPal and Israel don't necessarily mix. He was worried about taxes and all that other stuff, and I totally got it, and unfortunately, we had to let that go. But then the following year, he starts to really want a 68 Les Paul again. So at this point, I'm a little bit more serious in acquiring it, and we actually hunt down a 68 that was gonna work. But then we quickly realized the trading situation of one guitar to Israel and one from Israel to the United States, that requires a level of trust that wasn't necessarily there at that point in time. We could have made it happen. The timing just wasn't right. And then the next year, he decided that he fully trusts me. He's been watching my show for almost 5 years at this point, but he wants a vintage Stratocaster. If you've been watching the show a long time, you probably remember I was saying, hey, I'm looking for a vintage Strat. If I remember correctly, he wanted like a 63, and we could never find the right one, but it was like a constant 1 year search. We were just always a little bit too far apart with where I wanted to be in the guitar and where the sellers were. So that didn't work. And then the next year, he decides he wants the 68 Les Paul. We finally find it. We're ready to go, but then a family tragedy strikes, and he just needed to step away from the situation, which was unfortunate. But I totally understood. I was kind of going through a similar thing myself. So now, late 2023. That's right. We started talking October 2017. But finally, in late August, we come to a cash deal. He trusts me enough to send me the guitar, and then I can bank wire money to them. And unfortunately, the market has changed significantly on these things, so I am way too deep in this guitar, but it's one of those ones where I just had to suck it up and pay the new price. But that's the story of this one. From Les Paul to Mr. Friedman to a gentleman who grew up around that area of the store and later moved to Israel, and now it's back to the States, and you'll eventually see it in my museum as we slowly paint the story of the awesomest Norlin era guitars. And if you were to tell me this is kind of an ugly guitar with the harmonica bridge and everything, and Cherry Sunburst doesn't really pair that well with the rosewood color, I would kind of agree with you. Now that I've seen it in person, it does vibe great because I love the cherry bursted edges. That's something no The Les Paul got. In fact, it's almost like you're blending a natural The Les Paul and a wine red one all into one guitar. But before we get to the workbench segment, let's talk about reissues of Super Customs. So the initial run, you've got a couple dozen of them out there. But in 1984, Gibson did another run due to Neil Schon making the model famous. Now the specs were a little bit different, and it's next to impossible to find one of those without a headstock repair. But then in the mid-2000s era, they actually paid tribute to a lot of Norlin era stuff. This is the only time that the Super Custom branding was actually put onto the truss rod cover. So I at least still have this one in my collection, but it's just a very nice recreation of that. And they actually gave it an all maple body because Gibson just doesn't do the laminate sides on Les Pauls anymore. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and throw this one on the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs. Alright, doing a deep clean here. I ran across some very interesting things, but first we'll start with our pickups. We're T-tops, exactly as expected, dating to January of 1979 for the neck, and late January for our bridge. As far as pickup readings, unfortunately it looks like the output jack is going bad because I have to press this in to get the readings that we're supposed to get. So the bridge is 7.5k ohms, neck position 7.38, and middle position for fun 3.72. The gold is really worn off the neck pickup cover, and the strings must have been really low just to scratch it off the bridge positioning. But as is to be expected in this era, it is a short neck tenon. And inside here you can see the mahogany core right underneath our maple top. So nothing looks that different right here, but if you look in between that, there is another small maple layer. That is the top sandwich layer. That's something they did during the Norlin years. Like everybody talks about the pancake one of the early 70s. However, a lot of people do not know about that second one that lingered on longer just because people really couldn't see it. And here's what the bridge pickup cavity looks like. I was hoping to see like 4 Les Paul or Les Paul's signature hidden somewhere in here, but nope. But I did see some damages up here. It almost looks like it started as a scratch, but then maybe water got in or something and it just kind of lifted the finish a bit. You can definitely feel there's at least some sort of a finish chip there, if not a crack in the wood. Then if you go over to the bridge pickup cavity route, there's like a small splinter of wood missing right here, as well as a small one right here. I also noticed at some point in time somebody has replaced the bridge pickup ring. You see how it has a more of a matted over look to it, whereas if you go over here it's complete gloss black. That is definitely a sign of being replaced. But now, all those years, I thought this thing had a harmonica bridge, right? We've got the old photo with Les, we've got the previous owner's beautiful beauty shots, and then I get it, it's got it, and I take it off and it's like, oh, those are Nashville studs. And it's mounted like a Nashville. A harmonica bridge actually has a special set that looks like this. So instead of a big post right here, their post fits inside here, and then you have adjustment at the top. So I'm curious if Les Paul had replaced that at one point in time because he liked these or something, but this doesn't actually fit on the studs at all, and it requires your bridge to be ridiculously high up in the air for no reason. So this is one of those weird times where I think I'm actually going to put the bridge that's supposed to be on it, because I think it'll make it play better. But of course I'm going to keep that in the case. But this is an era-correct Gibson Nashville style bridge. They were made in Germany by Schaller in this time. Now let's look at our tailpiece. You see this additional surround right here? That's called a sustain sister. That is a premium brass block essentially put into the guitar's body to help get better sustain. And here's what the tailpiece itself looks like. If I had a spare gold TP6, I'd probably throw it on there. So there we go. The one thing that I always thought made this one look weird didn't technically even belong on it at all. Now if you look back in the seller's photos, it had gold knobs at one point in time. He just made some cosmetic changes over the years. He said he put what he thought were the original ones on here, but unfortunately no, that's not right. But that doesn't matter. I've got a set of era correct speed knobs that we can throw on here real quick. That's looking good to me. And here's our pickguard, nice and used, but cleaned up good. I guess now that I think about it, the pickguard covers over those blemishes, so I wonder if it was a player's sweat that kind of like absorbed into there. Kind of a shame. I really like the look of this thing without a pickguard, and normally I'm a pickguard on kind of guy. It's really tempting to get somebody to make custom wooden parts for the pickup rings, the selector switch, poker chip, make it closer to the Les Paul specs. All these years I was chasing this thing, hoping to add it to my collection, I didn't realize it was as beat up as it is. Somebody got some good use out of it. There's dents and dings all over. I didn't see these until like the final photos that were shared with me. But this is like one of those guitars where you can't really critique the condition because it's the only one exactly like this, and there are very few guitars that you could even say are similar to this one build-wise in the 70s. But this has been played extensively. But at the same time, it was still cared for, right? There's no giant gouges that really catch your attention. I mean, now that I polished it up, it just has a nice worn-in look, which I think matches well with our rosewood binding and this very dark heritage cherry sunburst finish. We'll get up close on that binding. So you can see you've got the rosewood layer, then there's a red layer, a white layer, and then what looks like a black layer. I'm not exactly sure what that wood is. I know I'd said poplar, but it's possible that could also be maple, and they just dyed it. So we'll take a quick gander along the edges. Polishing this up definitely made the flame come out. I just love the combination of the colors on the edge. That's something that we don't normally get to see on these. I've always liked the rosewood cap off right here by the strap button. Moving on from our mahogany core that's surrounded by maple everywhere, we've got our maple neck and our ebony fretboard. I went to town polishing these frets. They definitely needed a little bit of love and attention. Got your real mother of pearl Super 400 style inlays. There is a little bit of fret wear, mainly in your top 3 strings, but honestly not enough that you'd ever have to worry about doing anything. I did notice a boo-boo right there in our inlay work, and either a little bit of inlay shrinking there, or they didn't quite fully fill out that gap. And then all the way at the top, we do have a brass nut that's looking great now. It looks like it's possible that the nut has been replaced at one point in time. Because if you go over here, you can actually see there's a very small shim, but that is what most Super Customs came with, and the Les Pauls that didn't get the scalloped nut. But we have a 12-inch fretboard radius and a 24 3/4-inch scale. 1.685 for our nut width, which increases to 2.05 by the 12th. First fret neck depth, a skinny 0.78, and then 0.94 by the 10th. There's that neck at the 1st fret and the 12th fret. Definitely has a flatness to the back of it. It starts off more of a C shape and almost gets a bit to D shape territory. It's pretty much just your typical Norland era slim taper neck profile. But hey, that's fancy. We've got abalone side marker inlays. A lot of times Kalamazoo would use like a tortoiseshell material. Here's one thing I don't really like about this guitar. We've got the wooden binding, but the Les Paul had like multiple layers of everything going on, and it kind of worked in contrast to what you had over here. This having the regular binding material joining onto such a fancy body kind of seems weird. And then you get to the face of the headstock. It's basically just a regular Les Paul custom, constructed like a 2550 with the fretboard. I wish we could have had like abalone up here or something to make it a little bit crazier and more special. And we've got some lacquer wear right here by this inlay. At least we have the cool brass truss rod cover reading Les Paul Limited Edition. And it looks like this. And thankfully, our truss rod's in perfect shape, and you can see our maple neck. Moving on to the backside, this cleaned up beautifully and started to dance, but let's take a look at our electronics. Everything looks stock and original to me. This pot dates to very early 1979. This one is the 28th week of 1978, with a matching one up here, and then an early 1979 there. Usually what you're looking for in this era are these two to match and these two. In fact, these knobs actually have significantly different feel to them. These are very fast, these are rather slow, but they have a slightly different construction to them. But we can see what appears to be an April 17th, 1979 stamp on our base plate. And this is most definitely something, I just don't know what it says. Almost looks like a Curtis or something that starts with a C. And yes, this one does utilize the shielding tin yet, but it does have a traditional ground wire. It's just a little hard to see there. We've got our brass output jack plate. I cleaned it out and gave it a test. Yes, it's faulty about 90% of the time, but you can get it in there just right where we can leave it original and still enjoy it enough for a demo. In the Norland era, they used these shielded off output jacks. So you can't really get inside there to bend the prongs and make it a better contact, because you'd have to like literally rip the whole thing open. Here's what our toggle switch cavity looks like. It just utilizes regular black back plates. But here's the thing about the Les Paul style bodies. They round it in way before the plate is there, and that's just kind of their whole characteristic thing. You can see some areas where our rosewood binding kind of got chewed up. The current owner didn't make it seem like he gigged or played this out, so I'm curious, was it Les Paul that played this? I wonder if we could find some old footage of him using this, like when he had first gotten it. So that'd be like 1979 through maybe 1985. But again, for the most part, not too many areas that booger up the finish completely. From a few steps back, it almost looks minty. But man, I just love the edges of this guitar. They're so luxurious. I would have never thought a Heritage Cherry Burst would pair so well with rosewood binding. Moving on, we get to check out this neck. I was glad when I cleaned this that the flames started to dance a lot. This is a great neck. I love that double staining feature that they've got going on here. It's a 3-piece maple with 2 pieces of ebony. I suppose it could be a dyed walnut because that's typically what it is, but there is a scratch right here and a very unfortunate scratch right here, right where a headstock could potentially break, because there's no way that's deeper than the finish because you'd be able to see it within the wood. It's a see-through finish. Got our vertical Made in USA stamp, which makes it a Kalamazoo build. And our serial number, now that I own the guitar, I can share it with you. It's 1979, 309th day of the year, production number 83 for that particular day. I once owned a guitar that I dubbed the Super Standard. As far as we know, it might have been a NAMM show display piece designed to show off a new subsect of what they could do with the Les Paul style bodies. And most importantly, their coil splitting. In fact, there's a really weird Les Paul that recently showed up that has the neck of a 2550 and the coil splitting on it. Its serial number is awfully close and stamped in a very similar manner as the Super Standard. So they were definitely kind of experimenting before they fell upon this super custom model. And personally, I've only ever seen one other 1979 Super Custom. Most of the other original runs are 1980, but this one does predate the only other one that I saw. But unfortunately, we've got a little bit of finish chipping right here, but only in that area, strangely enough. Of course, we have to do a blacklight test on this one. So you'll notice the pickup ring on this one glows, but that one doesn't. Is that another way you can tell if something's been replaced? No, a lot of times in this era, one will glow and then the other doesn't. But in this case, yes, we do know that one has been replaced because the markings on the back are also different. But here's a good way for us to see how many areas have broken finish. Like you can definitely see our nicks and dings a lot better and all the worn areas along our binding, but not too much actually goes through the entire finish. Our new vintage style knobs. I would argue they're maybe a little bit more aged than this guitar, but they match the vibe close enough. Briefly look at our inlays, then get to the face of our headstock, which is looking good. Now our backside, you can see more of the same stuff. Nicks and dings, gouges, scratches, it's all there, including over here by our back plates. And our edges. There you can see some finish wear. And our other side, a little bit of stand rub or something. If you're wondering what's going on there with our rosewood binding, that's just kind of how it blacklights sometime, but some of that is also wear. Now up the back of the neck, you can see some more of those dings and scratches we were talking about. We can confirm that that's just in the clear coat. It's a scratch and or finish check. Honestly, it feels more like a scratch to me. It's a little bit deeper than a finish check, but it doesn't look like the finish has ever been touched up on this one. But all said and done, this one is just under 10 pounds, 9 pounds, 15.8 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. examples really chimey, especially that neck pickup. A lot of times humbuckers in the neck can get a bit muddy. If I was blindfolded, I'd almost think I was in the middle position. I noticed when stretching the strings in, it's because of the nut. Some of the nut slots aren't completely filed. That's the first time I've ever had issues with a brass nut on that. But hey, at least the output jack's working. That cleaning job actually did the trick. Now that we know all about the very first super custom ever made, what are my final thoughts on this entire journey? Was it worth it in the end? I don't know, I'm a little bit let down of how it plays. I mean, it's not bad. It's actually much better than most the Les Pauls. However, going into this, I was thinking super custom, but on steroids. But instead, I just got something completely different because I love super customs. They have a very distinct feel to it. And yeah, it's not fair to judge this one when it has a nut that's binding like crazy. That just makes it not stay in tune. I can tell there's a beast within this. I mean, the pickups sound great. And I absolutely love the way this thing looks in person. That wooden binding really plays well with the cherry sunburst finish, but it's definitely a lot more beat up than I thought it was. But if we can verify that that was Les Paul that beat this thing up, I think that'd be pretty cool. But again, it's one of those things. It's the only one like it if you have to have it from 1979. I mean, just think how crazy this guitar was to be built this fanciful from Gibson in 1979. Gibson typically just never uses wooden binding again after this very short period from the Austrian maple that they had purchased from a retired violin maker. These original The Les Paul body guitars, they're just special in that aspect because they're the ultra fancy guitars of the era that's known for, you know, basically cost-cutting measures. So Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed documenting this new piece with me today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will catch you guys tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day, and you might even enjoy this next one.